All right, welcome back, guys. We're going to continue with our material as far as cardiovascular system is concerned. So let's see where we're at. We got some more stuff to cover today. Here's where we left off. We were talking about cardiac cycle. In regards to the cardiac cycle, we were just mentioning how it is this constant diastole and systole. So remember, systole is the contraction, diastole is the relaxation. It has to do with the ventricles. It's just this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that's just how our hearts work. That's what we expect to see. Next, we can talk about cardiac output. It's a little bit of math. I know people don't like math, but it's not that big of a deal. It's the amount of blood pumped by each side of the heart in 1 minute. So in 1 minute, how much blood is being pumped? That's what we expect to see. How do we calculate cardiac output? Well, we have a formula for that right here. Cardiac output is calculated by heart rate times stroke volume. So heart rate is something that's pretty easy to measure, and we'll learn in one of our last videos actually, how to get heart rate, how to find heart rate. Stroke volume, on the other hand, is a little bit more challenging. Stroke volume is something that is the volume of blood pumped by each ventricle in one contraction. So that's not as easy to measure. So simply put, cardiac output is one of those things that you'd have to observe at like a cardiologist. So like a special location with special tools in order to get this number. But by getting this number, by calculating cardiac output, you can get a better understanding of how healthy the heart is. Is the heart working fine? Is it overworking? Is it not doing enough, etc.? Here we get an example of what cardiac output could look like. Obviously, if I don't give you the actual number, you will just have to multiply the two, right? Heart rate times stroke volume. The norm is something around 5,000 mils a minute, which is the equivalent of 5 liters a minute. And that sounds like a ton, but that makes sense because what we see here, the entire blood supply is going to pass through the body once per minute. That's a lot of blood, but if you think of how many times your heart beats a minute, which on average is going to be anywhere from 65 to like 80 something beats a minute, so this is pretty on par. But if the heart beats so often, we expect that when it's beating this often, it's going to circulate the blood a ton. Now, cardiac output does vary with demands of the body. That's what we see here. There's a number of different things that can affect cardiac output, such as crisis stressors, less blood in the body due to hemorrhaging, exercising. A number of things can affect cardiac output. That's what we expect. Now, in regards to stroke volume and regulating heart rate, stroke volume typically stays constant. It doesn't really change too much. However, heart rate is the thing that can affect cardiac output the most. That makes sense. If you were to literally, I have like a smartwatch on me right now. If I were to check my heart rate right now, it says that's at 70 beats per minute. If I were to check my heart rate in 2 minutes, it's going to be different. It's always fluctuating. That's the point. Now, this is actually an interesting concept to quickly discuss. It's called Starling's Law of the Heart. The idea behind Starling's Law is that the more the cardiac muscle is stretched, the stronger the contraction. So remember, the heart is a muscle, right? And we're going to learn more about muscles and muscular system in quarter 3. But the point here is that unlike other muscles where you strengthen it and it grows in size, this particular muscle strengthens by stretching. As you stretch the muscle, it actually becomes stronger and stronger, and thus improving contractions. Let me close this out real quick. There you go. So you want to improve the elasticity of the heart. So the idea that the way I like to think of it is the heart likes to work smarter, not harder. That's kind of the key. Okay, regulation of heart rate. So a lot of this stuff is honestly preview of future units. So for instance, sympathetic nervous system, that's all about your fight or flight response. We're going to learn about that down the line. Hormones like epinephrine and thyroxine, we'll learn about that in endocrine system. And then of course, exercise and decreased blood volume can also increase your heart rate. On the other spectrum, things that can decrease your heart rate include things like parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of the sympathetic, high blood pressure or blood volume, decreased, that should be a C right there, decreased venous return, and in certain extreme scenarios, which we're about to talk about this particular heart condition, in congestive heart failure, the heart is worn out and pumps weakly. There's a particular drug that can be given called digitalis, which works to provide a slow, steady, but stronger beat. So let's talk about congestive heart failure. It is a decline in pumping efficiency of the heart, causing inadequate circulation. It is a progressive condition similar to COPD. We learned that back in respiratory system, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The similarities are there. In chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you don't wake up with COPD out of nowhere. It's because you've had severe lung damage for a long time. Same thing here. In congestive heart failure, or CHF, you've had severe heart damage and it's now catching up. Things like coronary atherosclerosis, which is basically when the arteries that surround the heart, which are the coronary arteries, when they build up too much plaque, that can cause this condition. High blood pressure, which is hypertension. Obviously, that can make it so that your heart is working harder than it should. And a history of multiple myocardial infarctions, which is heart attacks. Now, depending on which side of the heart fails, it can lead to some serious problems. If the left side fails, remember the left side of the heart is what's going to carry rich oxygenated blood. If the left side fails, you undergo what's called cellular suffocation. The cells never get the blood, never get the oxygen that's necessary to survive. So then the cells die. It's not that you're suffocating because you can't breathe. The respiratory system is working fine. It's just the blood is not being sent through the body with oxygen. If the right side fails, you can get peripheral congestion and eventually an edema, which is going to be swelling, internal swelling due to trapped liquids. Obviously, left side failure is more fatal. But nonetheless, this is a condition that is very serious for the cardiovascular system. Okay, let's talk about the vessels a little bit here. There are 5 vessels we need to know. So these are the 5. And of those 5, there are 3 that are a little bit more precise or a little bit more specific that we're going to focus on. Let's talk about them individually. Arteries, these are type of vessels that we talked about in previous videos. But arteries, the key thing for arteries is that they always carry blood away from the heart. So they always carry blood away from the heart. I'm actually going to try to draw that heart again. It was a little messy. So they always carry blood away from the heart. That's a little better. Veins, on the other hand, are the opposite. They're kind of like the foils to an artery, if you want to use some English terminology. Veins are going to carry blood towards the heart. So they carry blood towards the heart. Capillaries are kind of a mix of both. We'll talk more about capillaries a little bit in this particular video and then the next video. Why we're not focusing on arterioles and venules too much is because we kind of know what they are. If you look at the prefix OLE, or the suffix OLE, OLE means small. Remember back in respiratory system, we talked about how bronchioles are small bronchi? An arteriole is simply a small artery. Venule, same thing. Even though it's ULE, that's literally the same thing. So a venule is just going to be a small version of the vein. All right. Here's what it all looks like. In red, we see the arteries. Typically, medical textbooks are going to show arteries in red because most arteries, 99% of arteries, are oxygen rich. The only exception to this is going to be the pulmonary arteries, which we've talked about in previous videos. The pulmonary arteries are going to be deoxygenated because they're still an artery. They're carrying blood away from the heart, but they're carrying deoxygenated blood because it hasn't been oxygenated yet. It hasn't interacted with the lungs. Veins. 99% of veins in the human body, as far as the medical textbooks, are going to be colored blue to indicate that they're oxygen poor or deoxygenated. The only exception, pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins are coming back from the lungs towards the heart. So these are oxygen rich. Those are the only exceptions to this rule that we think of. Here we can see in between the two, the capillaries. They're super, super tiny. Capillaries are found all over the body, but there's a distinct reason why we have capillaries, and we're about to discuss them. We can talk about the 3 layers here as well. I can actually edit this real quick. There we go. The 3 layers, honestly, it's more common sense. It's in the bold term. Tunica interna is the internal layer, right? So the innermost layer. Tunica media is the middle layer. Tunica externa is the outermost layer. Like I said, the words kind of give it away. Now, this is important. We need to talk about the walls and like what are the differences that we expect to see. So first of all, the walls of the arteries are going to be thicker than veins. If you look at the artery, you'll notice that there's a number of more layers compared to the vein. The veins is a little bit more thinner. Why would an artery have to be thicker than a vein? Think of what an artery does. An artery carries blood away from the heart. And how does it carry the blood away? Because the heart pumps. So when the heart pumps, it generates a lot of force. So the arteries need to be able to withstand the force of the heart. Makes sense. Veins, on the other hand, are going to have lumens. Well, they both have lumens, but their lumens is going to be larger. You notice the lumen right here. It's that inner tube, right? So the idea behind the lumen is that it's the inner diameter. Veins have a larger inner diameter than arteries do. The analogy I like to give that I think is super easy is that an artery is going to have their lumen is going to be more like a mixing straw. If you've ever been to a coffee shop and you'll notice how there's like a tiny straw that you can technically drink out of it, but there's not a lot of fluid that's going to travel up. It's more for mixing your drink. That's going to be the lumen of the artery. Whereas the lumen of the vein is more like your normal straw, right? It's much wider and you can drink a lot more fluid. Skeletal muscles, how do they move the blood? So here's just something really interesting. Arteries, we know, are going to move the blood through the body via the heart. When the heart pumps, it's going to shoot blood away, and that's enough force to send the blood where it needs to go. Makes sense. How do veins move around? Veins require the muscles. The muscles actually milk the blood. Literally, if you imagine like a cow and its udders being milked, it's a squeezing process and releasing. So squeezing and releasing. That action is necessary for your veins. Because if you think about it anatomically, your heart is in your chest. The majority of your body is below your heart. How is that blood from below your heart going to go against gravitational forces and move up? Because of the muscles. So the muscles help to move everything in the opposite direction, which is very fascinating. And again, you'll see it in the next slide. And then last but not least, let's go ahead and just star this stuff so we all know how important these four things are. I just knew I was jumping back and forth. The walls of the capillaries. So remember, the capillaries are in that purplish color on that last diagram. As far as the capillaries are concerned, they are only one cell layer thick. So because they're so thin, they're super, super thin, microscopically thin, it allows for gas exchange and nutrient exchange and waste product exchange and all types of exchange to occur between blood and tissue. So the long story short is that capillaries are your perfect vessel for diffusion. Diffusion is going to be always happening here. That's the key. And finally, we can see what's going on with that milking process. I already talked about this earlier on the last slide. Most arterial blood is pumped by the heart. Veins use this milking action to move the blood against gravitational forces. But it's super fascinating. The muscles that are doing this are not applying so much pressure to damage the veins, right? But it's enough pressure to move the blood upward. So that works really well, right? So I think that's a great place for us to conclude for today. Like I said, we don't have too much left. We have roughly like a video or maybe two left over. Not that much material overall. All right. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it. I'll see you guys on the next one.